carrier decks in the middle of the night. He was a very brave man. What would he have thought of, from a political point of view? I assure you that wouldn't have been going on in his mind. He would have been he was a very disciplined man who would have been working at the task at hand.
The plan for the family was that Charles was going to fly out, bring his wife with him, but unfortunately, they say he was not able to bring her because he wasn't able to get tickets for an Angels game. Charles Burlingame's birthday was today. Reporting live from West Hollywood, Miriam Hernandez, ABC 7 Eyewitness News. Now back to you.
Miriam, thank you. Other passengers aboard the hijacked jetliners have loved ones here in Orange County. Those families are mourning tonight as well, and for their stories, we'll go live now to Eyewitness News reporter Rick Romero. He's in Fountain Valley. Rick.
Well, Mark, you're about to meet two of those families. As you said, one of them lives here in Fountain Valley, the other one in Rancho Santa Margarita. That's in South Orange County. And as you're about to see, they both share in yesterday's tragedy, but they differ in how those people who caused that tragedy should be handled. For Tom and Melanie Frost of Rancho Santa Margarita, it was one of the happiest days of their lives when their 22-year-old daughter, Lisa, graduated from Boston University with not 1, but 2 degrees. Then yesterday became the darkest of days.
Her mother and I are understandably devastated.
Lisa was on United Flight 175 to San Francisco, headed to her first job. That plane was the second to hit the World Trade Center.
My heart goes out to all of the thousands of families that have been affected by this. I know my wife and I are suffering, and I know they must be suffering as well.
Families like the Stones of Fountain Valley. 54-year-old Doug Stone was one of the victims on American Airlines Flight 11. He was divorced from his wife, Beth, but remained tight with her and his 18-year-old son, Zach.
He's just a great guy. He cared so much about me. He'd do anything for me. He's always supported me.
We divorced when he was real young, but he always took care of Zachary and took care of me when he didn't have to. Always.
Two families with a common yet horrific bond, but separated by the thought of what's next.
I think we need to retaliate.
The loss of more human life will serve no purpose.
Now, as a side note to Zach, the young man that you saw in that story, when he first learned of his father's death, his mother was in Texas and she had to drive back home. So he was home alone when he learned of the news. This is Rick Romero reporting live from Fountain Valley for ABC 7 Eyewitness News. Now back to you.
So much grief. Thank you, Rick. Now a view from space of the tragedy in Manhattan. The International Space Station was over Manhattan soon after the terrorist attack. You can clearly see the smoke from the World Trade Center drifting to the southeast. This is from about 200 miles up, and this is a still from the Terra satellite as the smoke drifts directly south. We are learning new details about what happened on board those planes as they crashed. Michelle Tuzzi joins us in studio with more on that. Michelle?
Laura, we are hearing more stories tonight of passengers who were heroes. As United Airlines Flight 93 entered its last desperate moments aloft, at least 2 passengers phoned their wives to tell them they had a plan to stop the hijackers. Tonight, we hear from one of the wives. 38-year-old Tom Burnett was headed home to the Bay Area from a business trip to New York on United Flight 93. Using his cell phone, he called his wife in California and told her that 3 men had taken control of the plane.
His adrenaline was going. He was not whispering. He was talking quickly, and he was ready to do something.
It was the first of 3 phone calls Dina Burnett would receive from the plane. Her husband, an executive with a Bay Area pharmaceutical company, described how the terrorists had stabbed to death 1 person on board and were threatening to detonate a bomb. She told him about the attack on the World Trade Center.
He was fighting to come home. He had every intention of being here that night.
It's very likely Burnett's actions kept the plane from reaching its intended target. And a chilling report by the Christian Science Monitor says one of the pilots on the American Airlines Flight 11 secretly turned his radio microphone on, most of the way from Boston to New York, trying to alert controllers to the desperate situation. At one point, a hijacker is heard saying, "Don't do anything foolish. You're not going to get hurt." Later saying, "We have more planes. We have other planes." A statement not understood until later when the unthinkable happened. Controllers knew a hijack was in progress. They reportedly alerted the military, and fighter jets were reportedly scrambled, but they weren't in time to intercept the doomed plane. Recordings of that cockpit radio conversation are now in the hands of the FAA. Mark, back to you.
Heroism in the face of horror, Michelle. Hundreds of members of Congress gathered in the Capitol Rotunda this evening to pray for the victims of the terrorist attacks.
Was grace that taught my heart to fear.
We are one people. We are one family. We are one nation. Tonight we pray for those who are not here to pray for themselves.
Speaker after speaker said they were still in shock from this great tragedy.
There is still no indication of when Los Angeles International Airport will reopen for regular flights, but at the time it does, security will be extremely tight. Eyewitness News reporter Philip Palmer joins us live from LAX with the very latest on that part of the story. Philip?
Well, Laura, airport officials had hoped that some sort of air travel would resume tonight, but you can see the planes behind me are still dark, so we know that will not be the case. And if you just take a look down this way as we walk through Terminal 1 here, you can see this is America West. The emptiness, the vast emptiness, is just one example of how airports all across the country remain closed.
At this time, we do not know when we will receive approval from the FAA to reopen our airports.
When they do receive approval to reopen, LAX officials say they will provide at least 4 hours notice, which is how much time the airlines will need to serve passengers. But as to when that will happen, certainly not today, even for the passengers left in strange cities across the country, hoping to return home.
The FAA is taking their time. They want to make sure all of the security programs are in place around the country with the airports and the airlines. And this will continue to be their effort through the next couple of days. I personally don't think we're going to have many scheduled operations and departures much before probably Friday at the earliest.
And when those flights resume, expect an increased security presence with combined efforts from various law enforcement agencies. Planes will be searched. Curbside check-in will not be available. Checking in at hotels or other airport venues will no longer be available. But those are just some of the changes. And to folks we talked with at the airport today, the measures are welcome if their safety is at stake.
We just wonder ourselves as being put here and working here if it's safe to even be around here sometimes.
I just hope that people can get their lives back together and start moving on forward and not let these people know that they can threaten us. We are Americans, and you know, Americans always are resilient, so we'll bounce back.
Some other changes that are expected once air travel resumes. Passengers only will be allowed to the gates. Arriving passengers will be then shuttled to lots B and C, where they can be picked up by either friends or family members. And also the airlines and the airport are going to discourage the use of personal cars to bring people to the airport. What they want you to use is a taxi or even a shuttle service. Reporting live at LAX, Philip Palmer, ABC 7 Eyewitness News. Back to you in the studio.
All right, thank you very much, Philip. Certainly understandable given what has happened. The fear of flying seems to have increased for a lot of people. Eyewitness News reporter John Gregory joins us live. He's in Glendale with details on some other travel alternatives down here on the ground. John.
Well, Mark, we did meet some people worried about flying. Of course, right now, that's not an issue. Nobody can get in the air. But you can see the rail lines next to me. The trains are moving, buses as well. And we found plenty of people today taking advantage of both. The trains are rolling above the ground and below, and passengers are riding them, in some cases under the watchful eyes of police.
If it's going to happen, it's going to happen if it's on the ground or in the air, you know, or in a tunnel. So I just look at it, you know, if it's my time to go, it's my time to go.
Those types of things happen, but they don't happen too often, so I'll take my chances and get on a plane.
Flying's a lot more convenient, but I'm down with the train or the bus because that's cheaper and, you know, probably a little more safe.
Many are taking the bus, but not as many as some thought. Here at Greyhound, they haven't seen a real surge in traffic, but they expect that could change as more people become confident enough to travel again.
Today, we're starting to see a little bit of an increase, especially in short trips like LA to Phoenix, LA to Vegas, LA to Oakland, San Francisco. So we're starting to see more of the passengers trickle in.
Passengers who are realizing they still need to get from here to there, and if not by plane, then by train or bus, they will get to where they need to go. And most of the people we spoke with say they probably will be flying again, and most seem to be pretty confident that the government will find a way to improve security enough and make flying safe again. We're live in Glendale. John Gregory, ABC 7 Eyewitness News. Back to you, Mark, Laura.
Thank you, John. And there is a ripple effect. Travelers aren't the only ones affected by those grounded planes. The airport closures are having a serious impact on everything from mail deliveries to handling medical emergencies. Eyewitness News reporter Nikki Mohan has the story.
Contingency plans are in full swing, even if air travel is not. At the airport, mail is being offloaded into trucks in mailrooms across America. Supervisors say they're going back to basics and keeping America's parcels, bills, and letters moving to destinations nationwide.
We have the contractors in place. We have the trucks in place. So it's a matter of diverting the mail from the airlines to the ground transportation.
And what about the impact on life-saving deliveries such as organ transplants? Area doctors say surgeries have not been affected. Many of the needed organs tend to be donated and delivered within regions.
Most of the liver can be procured through ground transportation. But even if we have to fly, I think we can probably still fly, but we have to get approval from the FAA.
In fact, while we're in Dr. Jabor's office, he got an email alert saying that Life Flight could be activated whenever a patient's life was on the line. Truck drivers everywhere are filling the demand and are in demand during this national air slowdown. Even here at the post office, where workers are slightly delayed by this national tragedy, they say they're more affected by the overwhelming sadness rather than their delay.
I think everybody's really saddened and everyone's pulled together. People are not complaining about coming in early. You know, we're doing all we can to get the freight out.
FedEx planes were filled and ready to go when all air travel was grounded. At this usual hub of activity, workers say the silence of the airport and the circumstances surrounding it gives them an eerie feeling. At LAX, Nikki Mohan, ABC 7 Eyewitness News.
Just one day after the attacks on the East Coast, a sense of uneasiness has settled over some people in Southern California. As Eyewitness News reporter Sid Garcia tells us, city officials say things are starting to get back to normal, but for those who work in downtown Los Angeles, normal, well, it's something that has to be defined.
Last night, we called for cooperation. We have called for return to a normal life as soon as possible. And indicators throughout the course of the day tell us that life is back to normal in the city of Los Angeles.
Getting back to normal was easier said than done for many who work downtown. Even with reassurances by police that the city of LA is safe, many we talked to were still uneasy about returning to work this morning.
I was really kind of thinking that if they did that on the East Coast, were they still planning something for the West Coast? To be honest with you, that's what a lot of us are thinking, that there's still something waiting for us on the West Coast here to happen.
Downtown high-rises were open, but not everyone returned to work. Some who did were still on edge over yesterday's catastrophic attacks 3,000 miles away, wondering, could it happen here?
I just get scared if something might really happen. Something might even happen here. And since I live close by here downtown, so it's like, I'm just like a couple of ways from here, so it scares me.
Tara Redding wasn't too anxious about returning to jury duty today. She's nervous about safety, but she's also worried about her friends in New York who work around the World Trade Center.
It's still unnerving because I have a lot of friends and college mates I went to school with in New York who I know worked in that area, and I don't know where they're at and what's happened to them. So it's very sad right at this point for me.
As far as the LAUSD is concerned, more than 90% of teachers and students were back in the classroom today. The Madonna concert scheduled for Thursday night at Staples Center will go on as scheduled. On a serious note, there were 4 hate crimes reported to the LAPD, 3 against the Islamic Center in the Rampart Division. Those were hate emails. Those are also being investigated. In downtown LA, Sid Garcia, ABC 7 Eyewitness News.
Thank you, Sid. In our nation's capital, the rescue and recovery operation also continues at the Pentagon as tired workers search the rubble for victims. Their commander-in-chief views the devastation firsthand. Reporter Andrew Colton is live in Washington with the very latest on this story. Andrew?
Well, Laura, perhaps the headline out of this area tonight is this: despite all the damage you see at the Pentagon behind me, we're now receiving word that this may not have been part of the original plan. As As firefighters unfurl the flag from the Pentagon's roof, President Bush and Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld toward the destruction, the president calling it overwhelming.
Coming here makes me sad on the one hand. It also makes me angry.
Earlier, a disturbing revelation explaining why the president crisscrossed the country in Air Force One and why the White House was evacuated in the hours after the attack.
Our government has credible evidence that the White House and Air Force One were targets.
In Congress, the promise of justice and a prayer.
We are one people. We are one family. We are one nation. Tonight we pray for those who are not here to pray for themselves.
Now here at the Pentagon, emergency workers continue to work round the clock, but say, quite sadly, that this is now a recovery operation. They do not believe there to be any survivors. The death count, however, remains unclear tonight. They're still saying between 100 and 800. Dave, Laura?
It's Mark here. It's been a long day, I know, for you out there, Andrew. To what extent does the search for, or the recovery effort, how is it complicated by the fact that secrets have to be maintained? This isn't, you know, the Pentagon, after all. There are military secrets, the business of the military still being conducted out of there. How much is that complicating matters there?
Well, among those secrets would be the secret of how to answer that question. Military officials, emergency officials not telling us that, rather doing everything they can, they say, to get in there and get done what they need to get done. And remember, there are two major things they need to be doing, not just recovering the victims, but they are, of course, also looking for the two black boxes from the airplane, hoping that'll shed some light onto what happened here.
Andrew, as you pointed out, there's very little hope of finding anybody alive in the rubble, but what about the adjacent areas?
Well, the adjacent areas, again, it is the same thing. When you look at the damage, and television just doesn't do it justice, it really is confined to one center area, and it sure seems the emergency officials, the rescuers, say that if there were survivors, they would have been here and here, and the victims are going to be here, and that unfortunately, they say, at this point, they don't believe there to be any survivors.
All right. Andrew Colton reporting live in Washington. Thank you for that report tonight. As the manhunt continues now for those responsible for the attacks, federal investigators are getting some extra help from people who surf the web, and the internet itself may turn out to hold an important key to finding these terrorists. Eyewitness News reporter Kathy Vara has the story.
The internet has proven to be a crucial tool in the wake of this tragedy, helping people contact family and friends. Now the FBI is investigating an email address that may be connected to the attacks. Hundreds of tips are pouring into the FBI through a special website seeking information on the deadly attacks. Authorities are urging anyone with any information to log on.
For this case, we're using the Internet Fraud Complaint Center website, which is www.ifccfbi.gov.
The internet may provide valuable clues in this investigation. FBI agents have already served search warrants on major internet service providers, including AOL and Pasadena-based Earthlink. They are looking for information about an email address that may be connected to the terrorist attacks. All internet companies have been quick to comply. Websites created by Prodigy and the University of California, Berkeley are offering help for people who have not been able to get through to their family and friends because of busy phone lines. Other sites, including Google.com, have added messages of sympathy along with information. And at least for now, the auction giant eBay has banned the sale of items related to the World Trade Center and the Pentagon out of respect for the victims and their families. Internet providers often work with authorities to help solve crimes, but it is incredible to think that something we use every day, something as simple as an email address, could provide key information in the worst terrorist attacks on U.S. soil. In the newsroom, Kathy Vara, ABC 7 Eyewitness News.
Thank you, Kathy. Arab Americans and Muslims tonight fear that a backlash will surface against their communities in the wake of the attack on America. As our Brian Jenkins reports, leaders are pleading with the public to not take out anger against their people.
And Allah bless us to understand that we are one.
Prayer sessions at the Islamic Center of Southern California continue to take place under the protective watch of Los Angeles police officers, but in an increasingly supportive atmosphere, given today's presence of activists, politicians, and clergymen from other faiths, most notably Arab Jews.
There are over 1.5 million people of Middle Eastern descent in Los Angeles, if you count the Persians, the Arabs, the Armenians, the Jews. And it's time to really bring all these people together who share a common narrative, similar music, and that combats ignorance and fear.
Asked about the continuing hate mail and anti-Muslim hate calls that began trickling in yesterday, many remain concerned about reprisals against the innocent, especially their children.
I hope that it's not going to be any kind of ethnic or religious profiling going on, that everyone will just be patient and restrained from jumping to conclusions without having all the evidence in hand.
Unfortunately, we have gotten a few more phone calls, but I think it's also important to note that we have gotten a lot of calls in support of us, and actually the term love was used.
In fact, City Councilman Alex Padilla and Dennis Zine spoke briefly to Islamic Center members, assuring them that reports of hate calls were down and that those that were checked out did not appear to hold any real threat. Actor and activist Edward James Olmos likened the situation to the treatment of Japanese Americans after Pearl Harbor.
The problem with that is that the 99% of those people were U.S. citizens who had devoted their lives to this country. And we took a really difficult situation and made it worse. We must stop using that word race as if it was a cultural determinant and start to use it as a unifying word that only means one thing, the human race.
Brian Jenkins, ABC 7 Eyewitness News.
Emotional moments tonight at a candlelight vigil in New York City. A crowd of mourners gathered at St. Vincent's Hospital, where many victims of the World Trade Center blast were taken. They held their candles, shed tears, and looked to each other for strength as they grieve.
Southern California's religious community has been united as never before since yesterday's attacks, offering prayers for the victims and their families. And tonight come pledges of financial support, too. Our team coverage continues with Eyewitness News reporter Eileen Frere. She is live now in Inglewood. Eileen?
Well, you might be able to hear the music draining through the doors here at this church in Inglewood. There is a lot of energy in there tonight. Hundreds of people have turned out. This place is completely packed, all because of yesterday's tragedy. Vanessa Smith says she needed to come here.
Says, Lord, you are the lifter.
To pray with others.
I think I'm still in shock. I think I'm like in the middle. I don't know where I am. I'm like teeter-tottering from both sides. 1 minute I'm angry, 1 minute I'm feeling sad, or 1 minute I'm in tears.
Across the city, all faiths gather for special prayer sessions. A vigil near downtown Los Angeles.
The world needs healing at times like these, and this is one of the means of doing so.
Homeless people at the Dome Village share their grief.
Even though that this tragic thing has happened, that we still are together with our community, our neighbors, our friends.
It's easy to feel vulnerable at times like this.
Right now, I'm just, I just can't believe it. I know there's terrorists out there, but for something like this to happen on United States soil, it's kind of difficult to swallow right now.
It's easy to feel angry. Religious leaders say that's why it's so important in times like this to come together.
There's a therapeutic dimension to prayer, of connecting with God, of moving into a dimension that is beyond our immediate struggles, our immediate frustrations.
Now, you might be asking yourself, how can you help? Well, the Jewish Federation has set up a special fund to pay for crisis counseling and other needs of the victims of the terrorist attacks. Donations can be made to the Jewish Federation, care of the Victims of Terror Fund at 6505 Wilshire Boulevard, Suite 1000 in Los Angeles, 90048. Just one of the things you can do to help if you wish. Reporting live from Inglewood, Eileen Frere, ABC 7 Eyewitness News. Back to you.
There is strength in numbers. Thank you, Eileen. Yesterday's deadly attacks have prompted an urgent need for blood, and Southern Californians by the thousands are responding to that call. As Denise Tador reports, local blood banks are filled with donors, but Red Cross officials stress even more donors are needed.
I'm here to donate blood for the people who need it, and hopefully it'll benefit a lot of people.
Lines here at the American Red Cross in downtown Los Angeles continue to fill the hallways. And miles away in Burbank, Providence St. Joseph Medical Center staffers turned a 500-seat auditorium into a makeshift donation facility.
I was devastated at what I saw this morning, and there's nothing I can really do here. And if I could do anything, I thought this would be the best thing I could do.
In Southern California, about 4,000 people flooded American Red Cross centers. Throughout the day yesterday, 700,000 people called American Red Cross phone lines looking for the nearest place to donate.
We're doing the best we can. We're processing people as quickly as we can and trying to respond to this emergency as best as we can.
While some waits exceeded upwards of 5 hours, many people said they were willing to stick it out. But officials are urging people to be patient. If you can't get in today, blood donations will be needed for weeks to come.
From what I hear is true, these people are going to be needing blood for weeks and months to come. So we're hoping that the interest and the show of support does not just, drop off.
No one has grumbled. Everyone is smiling. Just look at that man over there. And I'm smiling too.
As you can see, a lot of tired people, but they're very happy to be able to donate blood. Now, Red Cross officials tell me they're going to be open for extended hours for as long as they need to be. Reporting in Los Angeles, I'm Denise Tudor, ABC 7 Eyewitness News.
If you would like to donate blood, you're urged to call the Red Cross at 1-800-GIVE-LIFE, or for more information, dial area code 213-739-4543.
Well, Laura, the high alert status is still in place at the U.S.-Mexico border crossings. In El Paso, Texas, people waited in line about twice as long as usual. Now, because of heightened security, U.S. border inspectors and customs agents are thoroughly checking just about every car that crosses the bridge. They are carefully looking under hoods, in trunks, and under floor mats. The long wait at the border is expected to continue throughout the week. Price gouging at the gas pumps may be over now. Gas prices that had jumped after yesterday's attacks are headed back to normal. In Fresno, prices increased from $1.20 to nearly $2 a gallon in one day. In some parts of the Midwest, gas had topped $5 a gallon. State and federal authorities are now threatening to take action against these price gougers. In the meantime, the Saudi Arabian ambassador to the United States is vowing not to increase the price of gasoline worldwide.
And we're talking about money right here, too. The stock markets in New York will remain closed tomorrow, and there is no word at this point whether they will reopen on Friday. Eyewitness News business specialist Jim Newman has been looking at the potential economic impact of this attack on America.
Most experts say stocks will fall when financial markets resume. However, most people feel the losses will be short-lived. The good thing is that many financial people overseas have confidence in the U.S. economy, its companies, and the stock market. Many people tell me they feel the terrorist attack may slow the recovery in the U.S. economy, but not prevent it. Meanwhile, insurance companies are trying to determine how many policyholders are affected by the events in New York. They are prepared to make good on all contracts. The World Trade Center had just come under new ownership a few months ago. For the first time in its 30-year history, Westfield America acquired a 99-year lease on the 11 million square foot World Trade Center complex. It was the biggest real estate deal ever, valued at $3.2 billion. Insurance executives say the total damage to Lower Manhattan, including the towers, could run as high as $20 billion. Jim Newman, Eyewitness News.
More tensions, more concerns in New York tonight over a possible new terrorist threat. The latest now on the attack on America. The Empire State Building was evacuated for a time. A bomb-sniffing dog identified a possible explosive package near the landmark high-rise. Turned out to be a false alarm. In the meantime, new concerns about more damaged buildings near the World Trade Center, concerns that they could collapse. Tonight, a spokesman for President Bush confirms the White House and Air Force One were two of the intended targets of the suicide bombers. An international manhunt is underway now to find the terrorists who helped to plot these attacks. And in Manhattan, the search is on for survivors. 82 people confirmed dead in New York alone. That number is expected to soar into the thousands. And in the meantime, all commercial air traffic remains grounded in the United States. For the latest information, please log on to abcnews.com or AOL keyword ABC7LA.
Important to point out that the Empire State Building turned out to be a false alarm. People have been asked to go back into that building. That is going to wrap it up for this edition of Eyewitness News.
We will continue to monitor any new developments and bring you updates throughout the evening right here.
We'll see you back here at 11 o'clock. We now turn it over to ABC News in New York with Peter Jennings as they continue their special live coverage of this event.
This is an ABC News special report.
Good evening. I'm Ted Koppel reporting tonight from London. I know that some of you have over the past several, indeed the past many hours, been watching my colleague Peter Jennings. I hope Peter is still sitting there in New York. Some of you have been watching local broadcasts. Peter, before I let you go, and Lord knows you have been putting in Herculean labors over these past few hours, this is so much, this business that you and I are in is so much a matter of perspective. Those of you who were watching at the end of these last few minutes when you were talking. That perspective is perhaps the easiest to understand. There are people also laboring with whom you've been talking at response and what the United States as a great nation is going to do in response to all of this. I wanted to get from you, before you go off and get some well-deserved rest, just your perspective on what you've been covering together with our ABC News colleagues over these last many hours, and your thoughts before you leave for this evening.
I think it's very difficult, Ted. I think you put your finger on something really important. Those of us who do these kind of jobs are, in some respects, robbed of perspective because we're operating in a pretty isolated environment. And we're the beneficiaries of people's anger and analysis and love and affection and sorrow and hope as it gets processed through the news division. But one of the things it's very hard to do is to have an overall sense of perspective sitting in this chair over many, many hours. But you also say something else which is hard for the country to understand, hard for all of us to understand, both individually and collectively, I think, at times like this, and that is simply how complicated this is. When a nation as great as this, which stands in most respects for so much that is good, but is seen by so many people, by many people in the world, as standing for things which are not good, is attacked, the nation, particularly if it's powerful and therefore knows its limitations, is, I think, suffused with the notion of anxiety because you can't do as much about it. I think it's very hard for us at the moment to understand how angry many people in the world are at the United States. You know, you and I have the benefits. Please tell me if I go on too long. You and I have had the benefits of working for many years overseas, much of it in the developing world, in my case in the Middle East, in yours in Asia, both of us in Africa. You've just had this extraordinary trip in the Congo. And so we're fortunate. Many Americans are not exposed to the profound antipathy, anger, and now manifested in hatred that people have for the United States because it's a big power and because they see it on the wrong side of issues. So I'll get out of your way at the moment now by just simply saying I think the most difficult thing for me over all of these hours is to have an overall sense of perspective and just try to take advantage of other people's.
Peter, thank you very much. Go off, get some much-deserved rest, and see if you can decompress a little before you have to come back into the hot seat again. The point that you and I have both been making, and it's one that I just want to emphasize before we go into this next phase now of trying to analyze what is going on, is that in this job, the best that you and I can hope to do is to take fragments of what is going on everywhere and by putting it together give people a sense of what is going on. I know many of you have just come back from a long day's work and you want to be updated on the latest news. We will try and do that for you. Some of you have been glued to your television sets all day long and you want some more thoughtful discussion. We will try and add to the thoughtful discussion you've already been hearing in the segments that you've been watching. But I'd like to begin with one of my Nightline colleagues, John Donvan, who has been spending the day putting together a number of reports that we'll be bringing you over the course of the next few hours, one of them having to do with the investigation thus far. And John, if you are in place, and because you and I are thousands of miles apart right now, it's a little difficult sometimes for me to know who is ready and who is not. I'm hoping that John is there either live or on tape, whichever you have. John, if you're live, indicate your presence, would you?
I'm talking to you and hearing you right now, Ted.
Very good. Tell me what you've put together here, and tell our audience at the same time.
Well, what I've really been doing today is relying an awful lot on some very, very good reporting by my colleagues at ABC News and the various bureaus around this city and actually around the country and around the world. All day long we've been hearing anything that ranges from rumor to hard fact and sifting it, and what I'm putting together in a report I think we're about to see is, at this point, the arithmetic of that, what we know so far, what it adds up to, and what it does not add up to. So if that report is ready to go, I think you'll know that and I'll know that, and we'll see it in just a moment. Otherwise, we can keep talking. For roughly the first 24 hours,
a huge explosion now raining debris on all of us.
Every image spoke of destruction.
We better get out of the way!
Confusion, vulnerability, and darkness. Darkness especially over the questions of who flew those planes into the towers and how did they take control of them and why.
The Department of Justice has undertaken perhaps the most massive and intensive investigation ever conducted in America.
Today, U.S. authorities said they made progress on answering some of those questions. Some of what they were up to we could see. Late last night, the FBI seized a car parked near the American Airlines terminal at Boston's Logan Airport. This was ABC News at sunrise this morning.
And it is believed that that vehicle was being driven by at least some of these suspects. And we're getting further information about that. The Boston Herald is reporting that of those suspects, that they believe one of them was a trained pilot. And again, consistent with what George was saying just a few minutes ago, that some of these suspects flew to Boston early Tuesday morning from Portland, and that they had entered this country from Canada.
The FBI also identified a hotel that one team spent the night in South Portland, Maine. Two suspects left another rental car in Maine and were seen on videotape.
I can tell you that the two individuals are both males in their mid to late 30s, based on the photo that I saw, and that each one was carrying some type of small shoulder bag, not a real bulky one, but something small. Both kind of dark complected, dark hair.
Also this morning in Coral Springs, Florida, neighbors reported that FBI agents overnight raided a house listed as the address for a man named Mohammed Atta, an Egyptian who was believed to be a hijacker on one of the jets that rammed the World Trade Center. They got the address from Atta's driver's license. He is a known associate of Osama bin Laden. While in Florida, Atta was trained as a pilot by this flight instructor.
We're looking as a commercial outfit in the United States to train people. And if these people come with the right paperwork, immigration, etc., passports, then we did our job and we want to train them.
This morning, the president was on television.
The American people need to know we're facing a different enemy than we have ever faced. This enemy hides in shadows and has no regard for human life. This is an enemy who preys on innocent and unsuspecting people, then runs for cover. But it won't be able to run for cover forever.
By noon today, some of the shadow apparently lifted. ABC News had learned that the FBI now knew the identity of all of the hijackers, at least 12 of them, from countries that included Saudi Arabia and Egypt.
The 4 planes were hijacked by between 3 and 6 individuals per plane, using knives and box cutters, and in some cases making bomb threats. Our government has credible evidence that the White House and Air Force One were targets. A number of the suspected hijackers were trained as pilots in the United States.
We have, in the last 24 hours, taken the manifests and used those as an evidentiary base, and have talked to many of the families of the victims and have successfully, I believe, identified many of the hijackers on each of the 4 flights that went down.
Also today, the Boston police raided a hotel, detained 3 people, 2 women and a man. Outside Providence, Rhode Island, they stopped an Amtrak train and took away 1 man. Late afternoon at the White House, the president's spokesman goes public with what before had been only a rumor.
We have specific and credible information that the White House and Air Force One were also intended targets of these attacks.
The plane in question is the one that ultimately flew into the Pentagon. Early this evening, investigators were dusting for fingerprints at the check-in counters at Dulles International Airport. Now what happened yesterday makes a little more sense, the way that people were at first evacuated from the White House rather casually, and then when it was realized one of the planes was headed their way, people were told to drop everything and run, and they did. And if Air Force One was a target, it also explains why the president hopscotched around the South for several hours yesterday, escorted by jet fighters, before returning to Washington. Add to all this searches of several houses in at least 3 states, and late tonight, another one in Hamburg, Germany.
Auf die Anschläge auf das World Trade Center und das Pentagon verwickelt gewesen sein. Über die Art der Tatbeteiligung konnte noch nichts gesagt werden, aber die...
And Ted, we have search warrants being executed overnight in Florida, New Jersey, and Massachusetts, and as we've said, other states. As far as we know, no arrest warrants have been issued. And there are just so many moving parts to this tonight that there were some of it we decided to discuss outside of the report because it's a little bit slippery. But that raid on the hotel in Boston, it's not really at all clear what happened there. They were led to the hotel reportedly by some information they picked up in one of the rental cars, led them to a specific hotel room there, and agents were surprised when they reached the room they were looking for, opened the door, and 3 people walked out. They detained those people, the 2 women and 1 man that we referred to. They have not arrested them, they have detained them, and it's not clear whether these people were involved or not. In fact, in all of these cases, of all of the people detained today, they're still not saying that they know whether or not for sure that they are suspects. They believe that they may have some link to Osama bin Laden, but they're not sure. Also want to point out, in one sense you can say it's amazingly quick response to already know, they say, the names of all of the hijackers. On the one hand, that is amazing, but what is also amazing is the implication of the fact that these men were receiving pilot training in the United States. Some of them were certified as pilots in the United States over a period that lasted at least a year. They've been here, they've been registered, they've been using their names and addresses and driver's licenses, which is allowing them, authorities now, to track these people to where they actually lived and where they went to school. And they got away with it for all that period of time. Even though a lot of them were known associates of Osama bin Laden and were on watch lists, they weren't being watched at the right time.
Actually, John, you touched on the very question I was just about to raise with you, and I'm going to be asking questions of all of our colleagues tonight, some of which you're not going to be able to answer. But 2 of those people, as you correctly point out, were on an FBI watch list. Is there any explanation yet as to how and why they were able to get into the country?
All we've heard are theories that they may have come in through Canada, they may have been smuggled in, they may have come in using false identity. But even if they came in under false identity or slipped into the country, they very quickly established what you might call standard legal identity. And we're filling out forms with the FAA to apply for pilot's licenses. So no, we don't have an answer to that.
John, I'll be coming back to you several times before our block of programming is over this evening, but thank you for what you've just reported. Nightline's Dave Marish is on the streets of New York City, just a few blocks from the site of the search and rescue effort. And Dave, at times like this, all I can say is, what can you tell us?
Ted, about 5 blocks from here, about 5 blocks south of here, in the absolute center of a brightly flood-lit disaster area, is a large firefighter with an almost as large magnetic whiteboard in front of him that has hundreds of numerical units on it in several colors. These just some of the many units of the New York Fire Department, Police Department, and dozens of other law enforcement and emergency service agencies from the whole metropolitan area that cover this area. It looks something like an anthill because the people are dwarfed by the massive size of the wreckage. When a 1,350-foot tower comes down, even in pieces, it makes a mountainous wreckage. It is at least 60 or 70 feet high, and behind its crest, a big black cloud of smoke continues to rise from what can literally be called the well of the world's sorrows. 82 people are known to have died here. The mayor of New York has requested 6,000 body bags. Those two numbers give you, I think, a very good sense of how little has been penetrated of this wreckage and how much more horror there is to be uncovered.
David, I want to move around to a number of our colleagues this evening, but before I let you go for the moment, and I should point out that we'll be coming back to you again also. When you spoke of the 80 known dead, you do not mention, of course, the firemen and the policemen who we know have died in the wreckage. Just a quick word on them. Lord knows they deserve mention at the top of this broadcast.
They certainly do, Ted. 202 New York City firefighters are still missing. 57 police officers, 200 other state employees. And I must say that missing must be presumed dead now. To see this wreckage, to have looked at this massive pancaking of floors and window frames compressed into, as I say, still a pile 50, 75, 80 feet high, but that was once 1,350 feet high. The vertical compression of the collapse of this building almost certainly has killed everyone who was within it. One note, though, Ted, that I want to pass on. The largest single renter in the World Trade Center, with 21 floors occupied by 3,500 employees. Morgan Stanley, the financial business company, reported that most, no hard number here, but most of their 3,500 employees on 21 floors in the area that was struck by the plane escaped this building and are alive tonight.
And one of the biggest jobs over these next few days, and this is one instance in which the internet is going to be of enormous value, and maybe we can talk about that a little bit later too, is that people now are trying to find out quite literally by making contact and asking those who have survived to let people know. The compilation of lists is going to be, in many respects, the principal focus of this effort over the next few days. Dave Marish was talking just a moment ago about how the wreckage looks from the outside. We're going to get an extraordinary look now at how it looks from the inside. I'd like to turn to my Nightline colleague, Michelle Martin in New York, who is joined by an amateur photographer who has some extraordinary video. Michelle?
Ted, I'd like to introduce you to Tim Cothran, who's actually a professional video journalist. He is a freelancer for ABC, and he was able to get inside what we are all calling ground zero of the World Trade Center today. And as you pointed out, he has some rather extraordinary video that we would like to show you now. We've condensed it, obviously, quite a bit. He shot about an hour of it, more than an hour. And Tim, why don't you tell us what we're seeing here? And about what time did you go in?
I started shooting tape about 2:30 in the afternoon. We entered the big atrium of the old the financial center, and this atrium used to be absolutely gorgeous. But in order to get to the wreckage, we had to go through this other building. At the top of these stairs, there was some graffiti that was actually written in the sand that's everywhere as a dedication to the brothers of all the firemen, and they all consider themselves brothers. And it's very, very important to them that they be remembered. And I thought that was a very special thing there.
What are you hearing here?
Well, a lot of saws, a lot of hubbub. And you walk forward, and here's this panoramic window of this vast, vast, vast destruction and all this activity going on outside.
What was the temperature like in there? Was it hot? Was it uncomfortable to be in there?
No, well, you know, we've been very fortunate that these days have been so beautiful in New York City. So it was eerie. Here you were in this enormous amphitheater of destruction, and it was just one of the nicest days of the year. But a tremendous amount of sawing and banging. And the guys work in teams, they help each other out. Sometimes if they find a particularly hot or interesting spot, they'll work in groups of 10 or a dozen. And it's all hands-on work. They're not using any heavy tools here, as you can see. They're going bit by bit. It's arduous, it's hard, and these guys are putting all their effort into it.
It also seems rather dangerous. I see many jagged pieces of metal. Did you have a sense of being in danger while you were on top of the rubble?
There's tons and tons of broken glass all over the place. I only had tennis sneakers on, so I was pretty worried. But you picked where you walked, and you just choose where you stepped.
What are we seeing here?
Well, this is poignant in that this is a fire truck. This is a badly charred fire truck. And it's one of the few things in this valley that has been actually kind of cleaned off and hosed off. Because it means a lot to these guys. I mean, you can see it's absolutely destroyed. The tires are burned, all the rigging is destroyed. And they're using it sort of as a table, as a setup area. And it really means a lot to them. It's a staging area, as well as a place where some people get very emotional, because a lot of guys died here. A lot.
And paying their respects.
And paying their respects.
Even as they continue to do the job to which they've been assigned today.
Absolutely.
Did you have a sense of being very far up? Did you have a sense of being a couple of stories up atop the rubble there?
It was really hard to gauge elevation because you're surrounded by some high pieces as well. You're sort of just this sensation of being in something of a valley. And it's just everything is smashed to atoms. There are no big pieces of anything.
And I think that this photograph speaks for itself. I think that everyone will recognize what is occurring here, that the remains of someone are being removed.
Exactly. In the 2 hours that I was there, I saw at least 10 body bags being lifted out, and they seem to find 2 and 3 sets of remains, and they used dogs. They called the dogs in, and the dogs have been there for, I'm sure, quite. In fact, before I left, they actually retired the dogs. The dogs actually got very fatigued, and they gave them the afternoon off, or the rest of the afternoon, which they certainly deserved. And they helped pick up body scents and so forth.
A sight that has become rather familiar from disasters in which Americans have volunteered around the world, but not one I think Americans expect to see here.
Just everybody pitching in, you know, it's the bucket brigade syndrome, where guys just move stuff out, they move it to the outside. And it was really hard because even though this disaster only happened a day ago, these cadavers are starting